You're staring at a shelf of lab equipment and wondering if you should spend the money on another shaker incubator, or if you'll end up with a machine that just sits there while you scramble for a workaround. I get that hesitation. The last thing you want is to buy something that looks great on paper, but doesn't fit the bench workflow you already have. The biggest fear is ending up with a piece of metal that takes up precious space, costs more than it saves, and still forces you to juggle tubes on a separate hot plate. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through why the benchmark scientific Incu-Shaker Mini H1000 ME might actually be the sweet spot for a lot of smaller labs, and where it could fall short for others. If you've ever tried to grow a handful of bacterial cultures for a class project, you know the routine. You need a steady temperature, a gentle orbital motion, and a platform that won't let your flasks tip over when the shaker starts. Bigger, floor-standing incubators can do the job, but they eat up floor space and usually come with a price tag that feels excessive if you only need to run a few samples at a time. The Mini H1000 ME is marketed as a benchtop solution that keeps the temperature range from just above room temperature up to 70 C, which covers most standard microbiology and enzymology protocols. Its platform can hold Erlenmeyer flasks, conical tubes, petri dishes, or even small trays, so you're not forced into a one-size-fits-all container. Who should actually consider this model? First, any teaching lab that runs short-term cultures for a semester or two. The unit's footprint is small enough to sit on a standard bench alongside a spectrophotometer, and the digital keypad makes it easy for students to set temperature, speed, and timer without hunting through a manual. Second, startup biotech teams that are still in the validation phase and only need to process a few hundred milliliters per run will appreciate the combination of orbital motion and temperature control in one compact box. Third, hobbyist biologists who have a home lab setup can finally get a reliable incubator shaker without having to repurpose a refrigerator and a separate shaker. On the flip side, if you run a production-scale facility where you need to incubate dozens of liters at a time, the Mini's 19 mm orbital radius and its limited platform size become a bottleneck. Also, protocols that demand temperatures below ambient +5 C, such as certain psychrophilic bacterial cultures or some low-temperature enzyme assays, won't be possible because the unit can't cool below room temperature. Finally, labs that rely heavily on programmable shaking profiles, for example, a stepwise increase in speed over a 24-hour fermentation, might find the lack of built-in memory for speed steps a bit limiting. The strengths that stand out in everyday use are pretty concrete. The rubber-coated, non-slip mat on the platform does exactly what it says. When the orbital motion kicks in, your flasks stay firmly in place, even when you run the shaker at the higher end of its speed range. That eliminates the little heart attacks you get when a tube slides off and spills broth across the bench. The 19 mm orbital motion is wide enough to create a consistent vortex in a 250 ml flask, which means you get even mixing without having to stop and swirl manually. The LED readout on the keypad shows temperature, speed, and time all at once, so you can glance at the front and confirm everything is set without digging into a menu. Because the controls are digital rather than analog knobs, you can dial in a temperature of 37 C and a speed of 180 revolutions per minute, and trust that the unit will hold those numbers without drifting. There are a few practical downsides worth mentioning. The temperature ceiling of. For everyday use, the biggest question is not just whether benchmark scientific Incu-Shaker Mini H1000 ME incubator shaker with non-slip flat mat platform, 230V EU plug has impressive specs, but whether those specs match the way you actually plan to use it. In the default_tech category, buyers should compare the headline features against their daily routine, setup space, compatibility needs, and how often they will use the product after the first week.